Broadcasting from Washington, D.C., this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me is Stefano Ratti. Stefano, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here. We are broadcasting from Solar Focus here in Baltimore, Maryland. The fact that we're at a solar show probably means you're in solar. Why don't we start by what do you do and what company do you represent?
Yes, so I'm a founder and CEO of Chaberton Energy. We're primarily a community solar company. We develop community solar projects, and we also develop projects for commercial and industrial customers in the Mid-Atlantic, across the U.S., and actually we have a little presence in Europe as well.
Wow, and so community solar is something that interests me because I think it evens out solar, democratizes solar some, right? I just moved back from living 4 years in Europe, and about 80% of the population there lived in apartments. Here we're in Baltimore. I think people probably live in multifamily dwellings. Is that going to help solve that problem? Is that part of the concept?
Yes, absolutely. The concept is, in fact, to democratize solar for everybody. So if you cannot have solar on your roof because perhaps you live in an apartment building or your roof is not suitable for solar, then community solar is a way to do it.
Now, yesterday here at the conference, I sat in some panels where the representatives from Virginia, I think from Maryland, and a couple states, and what they were talking about was some environmental impact from community solar. So I always have thought of solar as a green good thing, but they were talking about land use in lieu of rules and things like that. So what kind of land use concerns are there with community solar? Because it seemed to be a hot topic yesterday here at the conference.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, so we do community solar projects on a variety of sites, so with a variety of hosts. So we do some projects on rooftops, which are usually a little bit less controversial. We do also do projects on brownfields or land that is not being used for anything else, that may be like a landfill that has been closed. And so also those are very good locations. And we also do, where it's suitable, we also do projects on agricultural land where we take maybe a portion of a site that will be used for agriculture, and then we devote that to solar. It's got a lot of benefits, though. One, if you do that, you're really not impacting the land long term. So it's a lot better than, say, doing a permanent development. Solar is not a permanent development. It's over 30 or 40 years you produce energy, and then at the end of the project cycle, you actually take away the solar installation, and then you got your land that has been sitting fallow for those years, and now can be put back into agriculture or whatever the previous use was, which is very different from saying if you were to build a plant or a permanent, or a strip mall or housing development or whatnot. So it's very different. And also it's very good for farmers and landowners because it may allow them to continue to farm with the rest of the property. So community solar projects typically are not so big. So you may have a piece of property that's, say, 200 acres or 300 acres, but then you may use only 20 acres for community solar. And what that does, it provides an income to the owner, to the farmer, and then with that income, they're able to be more competitive with the rest of the farm, and they're able to keep farming and keep the land in agriculture. So it's got there's a lot of synergies with agricultural activities as well.
Now, two things that weren't on my radar that I heard yesterday were about compression. Was soil compression or compression was one thing that they were talking about, and then of course drainage. So what you just described didn't seem to impact either of those, but it seemed to be a hot topic. So are those things that are coming up in your day-to-day in your business?
Yeah, I'd rather not answer this.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep. Sorry, like I said, I just didn't know it. I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, I think it gets a little bit too technical, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. If that's okay.
Yeah, of course, I told you it's all good. Okay. All right, so you just told us, it's great use in agriculture and land and things of that nature. How far from the community does it need to be? I met someone yesterday, they said had a project inside DC, inside city limits for community solar. Where do these projects go? Is it farmland out in the country and you need connectivity and transmission, or is it generally close to the consumption?
Yeah, so it has to be on the distribution system. So it's not transmission. For those that may not be familiar with the distinction, the transmission lines are the big lines that go across the country or across the states. Typically, they are 69 kV kilovolts or higher, so they're very high tension and they can carry power for a long distance. Distribution system is at the lower voltage. And then it's the system that ultimately brings power to the ultimate customers. So the commercial businesses or residents. So the lines that you see in a city, those are all obviously distribution lines. So the community solar projects have to be part of the distribution system, but within that they can be placed anywhere within a certain territory of a certain utility. So you may have a situation, for example, here we are in Baltimore, right? A Baltimore resident may be signing up for one of our projects that is maybe a little bit further out, like in Howard County, which is say 20 miles from here. We have a few projects there, and that's the way it works with community solar.
And when you're building your projects, is storage a part of a project that you would put in?
So it has not been particularly in Maryland and Virginia because of a number of reasons. One, because there's really not a large penetration of renewables quite yet in the Mid-Atlantic. So storage is not such a need yet, and then also because there's no particular system to work with the utility on the storage side. So we're not as evolved in the Mid-Atlantic. We also do projects though across the country and in other states. Things are very different. One example is California. So California has seen a lot of renewables over the last 10 years. So the penetration of renewables is much more significant. And so they have a situation where they call, you may have heard the term, the duck curve, where there's a lot of it. Now it's been renamed the canyon curve, or it's because the effect is getting steeper and steeper. Effectively, what it means is that entails is that you have a lot of renewables, especially solar, coming on during the day, and so during the day the net load goes practically to zero. So there's not so much benefit in adding more solar during the day. Really what's important is to shift the use of solar from, say the 2 to 4 p.m. Peak of production to the 5 to 7 peak of consumption, which is when you have the most of the consumption, and now all the solar power is no longer producing. So in those states like California, it's extremely important that you have storage coupled with your solar power. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to. It's not going to be economically viable, and it's also not going to be good for the grid if you put too much solar without storage. So we do projects there where we add storage as well.
So how does it work on the ratepayer if I get community solar and it's in Howard County? I live here in Baltimore, let's say. How does the tariffing go on that? Because an electron just goes into the distribution network, right?
Yeah, the electron goes into the distribution network. Effectively, it's as if that project in Howard County was a little piece of that project was yours. So you get a credit for anything that the developer credits to you. So you get a credit from the utility for that electricity. So your bill with the utility goes down, and then you pay the credit to the developer. You make a payment to the developer for that credit that you receive from the utility. So ultimately, your bill goes down because you have a significant reduction of your bill, maybe up to 90% or 100% with the utility for the power that you've been credited. And then you pay for the credits back to the developer, but not as much as you would have paid the utility.
And how does these projects find a starting point or a finance part? Because that sounds great when the utility exists or when the community solar project exists. I sign up. Do I need to sign up for these projects before you build the project, or am I buying these? Now you've got a 20-acre project over there, and I want to buy some electricity. Am I coming to you then?
Yeah, a little bit about. So usually we will go out and as we say, subscribe these projects right before we go into construction, maybe 3 to 6 months before, or even like as they are in construction, we'll continue to subscribe customers. There's a lot of there's a lot of demand for these projects. So it's typically at this point in time, it's actually relatively speaking, relatively easy to find subscribers who want to do this, because why not? You can get a discount on your electricity effectively, and then you're doing a good thing. So it's not so complicated. So we don't necessarily need to have the project fully subscribed to go into financing, but we like to see some milestone. Maybe we'll want to have like 50% fully subscribed before we start construction, and then we know that we can subscribe the rest before the project is completed.
And it seems like from this conference, at least, that the state governments are trying to do their part to make these things happen. It seems like that it's been a bumpy, slow road, perhaps, depending on the state. But the representatives seem to be speaking, at least in panels that I've heard and discussions I've heard the last couple of days, that they're trying to remove some barriers. Are you seeing that in the industry as a developer of solar projects?
Yeah, so this is a very important point. So community solar is very specific to each state. So each state is a completely different story. So we're a Maryland-based company, and we started doing projects in Maryland. Maryland has been very supportive of community solar and the solar industry in general. So with some hiccups along the road, I would say, but generally very supportive. And so we have a fertile territory in Maryland for our projects. Other states are not as favorable to community solar. They may not like the program for a number of reasons, or they may have not done it yet. So we tend to stay with obviously we develop projects where the state has supportive policies in place. We are seeing more and more states that are actually joining jumping on the bandwagon, so to speak. It's because there's so many benefits, right? It's you can bring community solar into the state. You can so there's an economic development piece to it. You can actually there's a social justice piece to it, because now it's not, solar is no longer something that only rich people can install on their big roofs, but it's actually something that everybody can have access to. And so there are just so many benefits, and then it's good for the grid. If you do more on the distribution grid, then you have less need for big transmission lines to bring big power from far away. So there's so many benefits, and so we're seeing like more and more states that are in the process of developing and policies that are favorable to community solar. But it's very much of a state-specific game. So we're not everywhere. Right now, we're in our company's in 10 states, and there's maybe about half of the states across the country where there's community solar policies in place.
And one of the things that I recall from, we've had a lot of conversation of solar on the podcast over the years, is interconnect problems. So that was one of the gates as to when people were putting solar in as well. In the Mid-Atlantic, is that still a thing?
Yeah, so interconnection issues are a thing for sure. There's no question about that. There's a couple of things to look at when you think about interconnection. So first of all, with community solar and also with commercial and industrial customers, I want to say that we also serve individual commercial and industrial customers with our business. We always operate, like I said, at the distribution level. So we work to interconnect with the local utility. In this case, we're in Baltimore. It's Baltimore Gas and Electric. So if we do a project here, would be with BGE. So we don't work with the large RTOs like PJM. So it's a different process, which generally it's an easier process. So some of the large utility scale projects are facing very, very long delays for interconnection, and we're talking like 3, 5, 7 years to get interconnected. Because we stay at the distribution level, generally the process is faster. However, it's not as fast as one would like for sure. So even at the distribution level, we're seeing a lot of congestion. We're seeing as we have more projects, we're seeing some difficulties working with the utilities. And sometimes, like the states, we have utilities that are very collaborative, and we work with them well. And then we also see utilities that sometimes are more difficult to work with. Sometimes they see us as potential competition, or they see us as, it's not the way that things have been for the last 20 years. We're kind of bringing a new model, a new thing, and so there's a little bit of reluctancy to go along with it, so they can create some roadblocks sometimes. So certainly it's an important issue, and sometimes it can take even relatively small projects a year or two to get interconnected.
And we happen to be in Maryland today. You said you're a Maryland company. I mean, Maryland is a fairly populated state. If you're not out in the Eastern Shore or some of the more regionals, it can be pretty tight and pretty old infrastructure. When a hurricane or windstorm blows through, power can go out quite often, things like that. Is the infrastructure able to handle this distributed architecture? Is there a bunch of investment being put in place to help companies like yours scale up and bring solar and renewables in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's at the federal level, obviously there's been the Infrastructure Act that is supposed to help with some of these issues. But generally, from our perspective as a community solar developer, what happens is that when we put a project in a certain location, we're going to be responsible for any upgrade that is needed because of that project. So that's it becomes an economic consideration. So there may be locations where we go and we realize pretty soon that it's going to be too expensive to do this because we cannot physically interconnect in an economically viable way. So there is always that consideration in place. But generally, the projects shoulder the cost of the upgrades.
And what about pushback on land use? So, if you need a 20-acre plot and you're going to put solar panels in, it's great that the land isn't really impacted from what you described and that you can get it back at some point in the future. But, not in my backyard may be something that people don't want to, look out at solar farms. So how many community and land zoning meetings and things do your team have to go to when you're announced that we're suddenly going to put this project in my area?
Yeah, a lot of them, for sure. And I invite you to come to my panel. Actually, at 3:15, we'll be talking about community engagement, and I'll be one of the speakers on that panel. But yes, I mean this is a big thing for our company. We have a team that does what we call community engagement. And then we have another team that is responsible for all the permitting activities, working with the local jurisdictions. There is a lot of thinking and effort that goes into it. And yes, it's a big topic. So it's when you put a project, first of all, we try to site it appropriately. So we're trying to do it in a way that's we know it's not going to be too visible, or maybe it's not on parkland or protected lands or anything that could obviously create issues, right? And then we start to we learned over the years that it's very important to start to work with the community very early on. So almost immediately, as soon as we have an idea, like we may be doing a project here, we go and meet with the neighbors. We have a community meeting where we present our initial plan, right? It's not the final plan. We say, this is what we're thinking about doing. We present the information. This is what solar brings, and this is the benefits, and this is the, this is what it's going to look like, and this is why we're doing it. And then we solicit the input from the community. So it's, often the main concern is visual, right? That's there's other concerns too that the community may have, but generally it's a visual question. Like, I just don't like to look at the solar panels, right? So we try to find a way that that is acceptable that the project is acceptable to the community. We may put a little bit more, a bigger landscaping buffer, or maybe do a bigger setback, or maybe move the panels from one portion of the site to another portion of the site, so that it's more palatable. There may be other consideration that we didn't know about, right? We learn a lot during that process. So we spent a lot of time with the community, and then of course we spent a lot of time with the as we call the AHAs, the authorities having jurisdiction. So the permitting authorities that will ultimately give us the permit, and so we work with them, and that's a pretty involved process, especially in places like Maryland, where you may have a more robust set of requirements, or a strong sense of we really want to be environmentally friendly in every aspect. So it may take a couple of years to get a project fully permitted, the site plan approved, and there's a lot of consideration that go like into, are we affecting wetlands in any way? What about the stormwater management? There's so many things that go into a project, and yes, that's a lot of what we do as a company.
Is the land that you use for this commercially zoned, or what kind of zoning does a plot of land? So if I have land,
Yep.
I've got 20 acres somewhere, and I've said, hey, I'd love to lease or sell you this parcel. What kind of
Yeah.
zoning are you guys looking for?
Well, that depends. That doesn't even depend on the state. It depends on the county regulations. So there's county level regulations. In some cases, if you go into, this is from Maryland, if you go further north, starting from Pennsylvania, New Jersey on, actually the jurisdiction is at the town level, so it's even more local. So something that may work for a town may not work for another town because they have different zoning regulations. So generally, I mean, we work with all types of land. So we work with residentially zoned land, commercially zoned land, industrially zoned land, and any declination of those, because every county has their own their own classifications. Usually, I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, industrially zoned land will be much easier to develop because that's what it's for, right? And so there's less. There are less restrictions, but at the same time, it comes with a price tag. It's going to be much more expensive to acquire or to lease. Commercially zoned, a little bit less, and then agriculture tends to be the least expensive. But at the same time, there are going to be a lot of constraints that you need to work with. Rightly so. I mean, so that's so we work within all the different classes.
Now, the other thing I know about living and having lived for a while in the Mid-Atlantic is we get the worst weather of the summer and the worst weather of the winter, right? So those 100-year weather events seem to happen fairly often, as they are a lot of the world. Are there unique things that you need to consider doing Mid-Atlantic installs as opposed to maybe doing it up north or down south, somewhere different?
Yeah, I mean, every place has their own requirements. I would say the Mid-Atlantic is actually pretty good as far as horrible events go. Right? We don't get a lot of earthquakes. We don't get a lot of hurricanes. But for example, we do projects in Delaware, right, and other coastal areas. So if you're on the coast, right, obviously the wind load that you may need to be able to design for is higher than if you are like further inland. Because you may have a hurricane come through, right? So you account for that in the design, right? So usually you drive posts into the ground to build your racking system for the solar panels. So if you're in a high wind load area, you may need to go deeper, right? So it may affect your cost. You need to anchor deeper, and so that's just an example. So there's a lot of consideration that come in doing the design. So we also do as part of our as you go through the development period, right? Those 2 years where you have to get the permit, you have to get the interconnection, but at the same time you also have to fully design your project, and so those considerations come in. But usually it's the Mid-Atlantic is not so bad.
So how do the economics change as it becomes more popular? So right now you said it's pretty early in the game. There's not a lot of community solar in the Mid-Atlantic, or maybe Maryland particularly. It was maybe a little bit slower than some states. How does the business model work? Because, I mean, we're at a conference right now. There's 250 developers here, all looking and eyeing the same thing you're eyeing, and you're in the private sector. So how's this game going to play out as we go forward?
I think we're just at the beginning. So I think the business model is very robust. So I think what we've seen, there's a lot of capital that is out there looking to invest in projects like the one that we develop, and we don't see that going away anytime soon. Like I said, the community solar is a relatively new part of the industry, and so we're just at the beginning. So I think as we have more states and more opportunities to do these projects, you'll see more community solar. I don't see an issue, and so more people will sign up for community solar on the residential side. There will be more. It will become more mainstream, right? So it will be, hopefully more people will know about it. But I think the business model is robust and will continue for the foreseeable future.
Have you seen when large developments go in, if large home developments or even a high rise or something like that, is community solar considered part of the development plans or in the code coming up in the future? Or is that something crystal ball future, or is that something that we're on the horizon of? If I want to put in a large home development.
That's a good question. I mean, we've seen some regulations around the country where in some places, I mean, starting from California, maybe other places too, where solar is starting to get mandated on new construction. It's not necessarily indicated as to be a community solar. It could be a behind the meter. It could be something else. But we're seeing some of that. Frankly, we haven't as a company played in that space quite yet. But yeah, I think we'll see probably more of that in the future.
And in terms of scale, how many megawatts of power do you think you guys are doing so far?
So for currently we're doing about 50 megawatt a year. That's what we're looking at to do for 2024. And I think we're still a relatively young company, so we're still in a very much of a growth trajectory. So we're looking to for 2025 to do north of 100. And we'll do, hopefully we'll continue to grow, I think, along with the industry. And so there's a lot of opportunities. We do more in more states. We'll do more.
And how are you finding a workforce to help you grow?
So that's a very good question as well. I mean, I like to say that at any company, but certainly our company is just as good as the people who work in the company. So we put a lot of effort in recruiting the right people, and we've been very lucky so far. We have a really good team. We focus very much on development, so we're not, as far as the size of our company, we're not so big. We're actually probably close to 50 people right now. So because we don't do the installation in-house or some of the other activities that take a large workforce, we tend to be fairly lean. But still, nevertheless, it's extremely important to find the right people, and it's not always easy. We've had good success with people coming from the solar industry, and have also had really good success with people that are coming from outside the solar industry that they're interested by what we're doing. They're interested by our mission. They're interested by our culture, and they come in and we can train them, and they've been doing really well. And of course, I mean, for us, it's very important also to have a company with a really good culture where people enjoy what they do. We're lucky enough that we're in an industry that has a higher purpose, a good mission. We're helping people save money on their bills. We're helping the environment, putting solar in the ground. There's just a lot of things to really appreciate, and so we're lucky enough that we're able to attract and retain really good people. But that's always top of our mind.
And then, so you get good people. You talked about these projects. You gave a fairly long life expectancy. What kind of work do you do during the project? So you set up a 20-acre field, let's call it, and you've got it sitting there. What kind of maintenance and support are you needing to do to keep them performing at the performa you rated when you put the project in?
Yeah, so as our company is not operating the projects, we're not set up to operate. So there's other investors and other companies that we partner with for to actually operate the projects because it takes a specific skill set, and also it's best done when it's done at scale. So it's better like if you have an operating company that may manage like 300 or 500 or maybe a gigawatt of projects, and then you can actually do it much more efficiently. But just to answer your question, yeah, I mean the maintenance is relatively limited. It doesn't take a lot of effort during the life of the project. The solar panels are pretty, you leave them out there and they produce electricity, but you have to do certain things. Obviously, you have to take care of the grounds. You have to replace occasionally, inverters may actually have issues, or you may need to replace an inverter, or anything that comes up, then you do that.
But that's outside the scope of what you do. So
it's outside the scope of our company, yeah.
Your company's focus is basically developing the project.
Yes.
And then, so basically you're part of everything from finding site selection to
Correct.
engineering the solution.
Yes, permitting.
Pre-sell the solution, and then you basically exit.
Yeah, generally, yes. That's our model. Yes, we very much focus on development. So just like you said, yeah, we look for host. We work with the host, and this is a long cycle, right? It can take years. So we're not just exiting immediately, right? But we do everything from permitting to interconnection to the design, the subscriptions, and then for the long-term ownership and operation, then we usually partner with investors. So effectively, we're not the long-term owners and operators, and it's better done. There's a difference in skill sets, right? I mean, it's very different if you're a development company. You have a certain business model, you have a certain risk level. There's a certain type of people too that you attract. That it's a little bit more. Projects can go sideways, so you have to be ready to address all the issues that come up during development. When you are in operation, it's much more of a very specific discipline, risk management. It's a totally different mindset. It's totally different skill, and it's also totally different capital, right? I mean, it's totally different capital that you attract. So there's good reasons why those two should be separate. Some companies do both, even though then within the company, then you may have two very, very different groups, right? But we like to focus on what we do best, which is the development side.
Now, you mentioned capital. And when I think of projects like this, are incentives an important part, or government incentives an important part of making these projects pencil out, or do they pencil out without incentives?
Yeah, I think there's an important part. There are basically two types of incentives that come into play here. One is the federal tax credits, the ITC, the investment tax credit, which gives you back 30% of the investment cost into the project as tax credit. So that's pretty significant. And then the second one, which is a state-based incentive, which is the ability to monetize renewable energy certificates, which depends on whatever framework you have at each state. In each state, renewable targets that then create an incentive for the developers to do this.
Well, awesome. I appreciate you spending your time on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure for me too.
And I wish you well on your talk this afternoon at Solar Focus here in Baltimore, Maryland. For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode, finding out a little bit more about what's happening in the Mid-Atlantic and one developer's view of how community solar is getting put in place. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And for our audience, we'll see you again next time on the Insider's Guide to Energy podcast. Bye-bye for now.